Hello and welcome. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on today's IBT Online Global webinar. The series continues with the European General Data Protection Regulation webinar. We will be starting this webinar in exactly 3 minutes time. The European General Data Protection Regulation aims to strengthen and unify data protection for individuals within the European Union, whilst addressing the export of personal data outside the EU. GDPR will affect any company doing business in Europe, and it will be strictly enforced. Today, we're going to present on what is GDPR, what the companies need to do to comply, how do GDPR and how will it be enforced? How will GDPR affect exporters to the EU? And are there any benefits for international business from GDPR? So given the current high-profile news re personal data being accessed and misused, the most glaring recent example is Facebook with 87 million Facebook users' data being, shall we say, placed sideways. If you have a Facebook account, that could be you. Facebook's second-in-command, Sheryl Sandberg, has said, "We are comprehensively looking at how Facebook data will be used, and Facebook is right now rolling out the controls required under Europe's new regulatory framework on privacy. That is known as the General Data Protection Regulation. And this to every user, even outside Europe. Europe is ahead on this," she has said. So today, with the IBT Online webinar, on the European General Data Protection Regulation, you're going to be ahead of this. The webinar will begin in exactly 1 minute's time now. Thank you for joining us. Right, hello everybody, thank you, good day, thank you for joining us. Let's get started with today's webinar. It's Understanding the European General Data Protection Regulation, that is GDPR, all about how exporters can comply and succeed in the post-GDPR Europe. Welcome. Thank you for joining us wherever you may be. To those of you over in the US, a very good morning to you. Those of you here in Europe, a good afternoon. And to the many of you over in Asia, well, a very good evening to you. And also, I want to say hello to the many of you who are listening to this webinar on demand, on the recorded version, so it's whenever you want. So wherever you are, whatever time of day or night it is with you, you're very welcome. My name is John Worthington. I am the CEO here at IBT Online, and I am hosting here today, and I have the huge pleasure of introducing our Go Global webinar series. Today, we're all about the impending European General Data Protection Regulation. And by impending, I mean it's imminent. It's May the 25th, 2018, a date to remember. We are passionate about our Go Global webinar series. It's all about knowledge and understanding in this fast-moving and ever-changing online international world. There's always a lot to learn and to keep up to date, and today's Go Global webinar is a great example, understanding the impending European General Data Protection Regulation. Now, a quick word before we start. As always, I do a little housekeeping so you know what to expect from our online global webinar. For you returnees, welcome back, you know the drill. But for those of you who don't, do know that this webinar is one in our Go Global webinar series. We are all about helping you grow your sales, grow your brands, and grow your businesses globally. And to do that, of course, legally and securely and with respect to the regulatory environments. The Go Global webinar series is over 3 years old now, so there's a rich catalog of recorded webinars available to you, covering many markets and many subjects related to international business. So if you go to www.ibt.onl/resources, you'll find a treasure trove there. And for future webinars, we'll go /webinars and you'll find the list. This webinar will be approximately 45 minutes with a brief introduction, that's right now by myself, and before I hand over to Susanna. There will be 3 polls, so please, we ask you to participate. Be ready for the polls. There will also be questions at the end, so please use the question box. There it is, you can see it on the right-hand side of your screen, marked questions. Just open it up and please submit your questions. You'll be very welcome. There's also a chat box if you'd like to. Do know at the end of this webinar, we have prepared for you a brief How GDPR Compliant Are You survey. This will enable you to find out how GDPR compliant you are and get even more value from this webinar. And finally, we are pleased to be able to provide you with a copy of our email of this webinar. The recording and slide deck will be sent to you on Friday after it has been prepared by our back office. So now sit back, relax, have a morning coffee, an afternoon tea, or an evening drink, and let's get going. The theme today is the European General Data Protection Regulation, and I'm proud to be joined by my co-presenters. First of all, on the left of your screen there, you see Susanna. Susanna is IBT Online's Chief Content Officer, and so is responsible for all of our digital media and multi-channel publications. Susanna brings together and curates a huge wealth of international online research and knowledge that is then made available to you on our website and social media channels. So do go check out the IBT Online white papers, our ebooks, infograms, and videos, and of course, the many webinars that are there dedicated to helping you be successful in selling and growing your brands internationally and online. And today, GDPR is a great example. There is also a blog on the subject that Susanna recently published. Susanna has spent her career working for businesses internationally in the US and in Europe. Matthias Hertigona, a partner at VLV Law. After gaining experience, amongst others, in public law and commercial law, Matthias joined VLV Law in October 2008 and became a partner in 2011, and has since then expanded his clientele further with an emphasis on commercial companies. And on the right hand of your screen is Lisbeth. Lisbeth van der Spiegel is also a partner at VLV Law. Lisbeth specializes in arbitration and commercial law and has joined VLV in 2004. Is known for her work on a number of cases relating to media, show, and sports businesses. VLV Law is a Belgian law firm with a wide range of clients and a wide breadth of expertise with lawyers specialized in corporate and many areas of law. Importantly for us today and for all of our GDPR concerns, VLV is also a member of the European Law Firm Group, which is a network of independent dynamic law firms founded back in 1989, and today comprises over 800 locally qualified lawyers across the 28 European Union countries. With international connections, who know each other personally and collaborate to offer clear, cross-border legal advice, including, of course, unique insight into GDPR. The European Law Firm Group advises multinationals, financial institutions, public and private companies, and individuals, and government agencies, partnerships, and charities, all, of course, who are concerned by GDPR. A few words on IBT Online. IBT Online is a privately held US and European company. IBT stands for International Business and Technologies, and it's all online. We've been in business since 2002. That's over 16 years, and we've come a long way and are proud to say so have our clients. We're proud of our international trade awards, winning the online global programs, which comprises website localization and international online marketing, serving over 400 companies. And the online global program has a proven track record itself with over 1,000 online global programs, delivering measurable sales, brand, and business growth for our clients all around the world in all of the world's major markets, of course, in Europe. At IBT Online, we understand the GDPR challenges that are faced by companies, and have solutions to ensure that GDPR compliance can be gained rapidly given the time frame. Now with that, I close out and I hand over to my colleague Susanna. Susanna, are you there?
Hello, John. Thank you very much for that introduction, and hello to all, greetings to all exporters. So what we're going to talk about today, we thought we'd divide it up into a couple of different sections to talk about GDPR. Obviously, this webinar is not some magnum opus on GDPR. That'd be way larger than our allocated time, but we do hope to leave you with a broad understanding and some practical steps to take away with. So we thought we'd start with just a very brief sort of landscape, broad brush picture of websites in Europe. And this becomes important when we talk about the case studies at the end. So very briefly, just websites in Europe. Then Matthias and Lisbeth are going to be talking about some of the highlights of GDPR and what are the main defining characteristics, and in particular, this definition of a persona and of who is who in GDPR. And then I'm going to round up with some case studies at the end to sort of bring it on a practical level. So with that, let's just get started here. So I want to talk first about sort of some websites in Europe and what does that mean? Why do we have to look at this? Why is that important, and how we collect data? Just obviously, you know, a quick reminder of what is the European Union. It is $17 trillion of economy. The US, by the way, is a total of 18 trillion. So, you know, it's a pretty comparable size to the entire US economy, just slightly under, well, $1 trillion under. It's composed of 28 different countries. The UK is still in the EU for the moment. Now that is over 500 million people. I think that's interesting as well, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. Out of those 506 million people, about 87% use the internet on a very regular basis. They use it for all kinds of things, for work, but also social media. And that, again, is what we're talking about here. And out of those, you know, 300 million are regular e-shoppers, for those who are interested in e-commerce in particular. So it is a very large sphere that we're going to be talking about in terms of GDPR and who that affects. Before we launch further, John, perhaps a quick poll just to see if our audience are all participating there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susanna. So I'm launching the first poll. Please pay attention, grab your mice or your touchpad or whatever it is as I launch this, and please share with us, do you do business in Europe? We'd like to know. Are you yes in market with partners, yes in market with partners and online only, thinking about it, or no? I'm going to give you some of the feedback. 50% are saying yes, 38% has gone down in market partners, 30% with in-market partners and online, 11% are saying yes, online only, and 5% there are saying they're thinking about it. So look, with that, thank you very much to you. Clearly, if the answer is yes, if you're on the top 3, you're concerned by today, and we thank you for that information. That's the end of the first poll. Susanna, I'm going to close it and hand back to you.
I wanted to put this forward as just a, you know, one slide summarizing a little bit of the business environment that most of you find yourselves in today. In today's world, which is a very customer-centric or client-centric world, and they have, via the internet, via social media, the ability to interact with all kinds of other stakeholders. Your challenge as a company is to try and interject and be part of those conversations in a positive way. So customer to customer discussions about things that concern you, you want to try and have some input on. You also want to try and reach those customers on a regular basis and influence and hopefully impress upon them the advantages of doing business with you. Today, you look at someone's website, you engage in their website, and you engage in the social media of that website. So, you know, as a company, you need to build and influence those transactions and build the trust that is so necessary for the buying experience. If you want customers to buy your services or your product, they need to be able to trust you as well as to find you. I want to put that out there as sort of a major thing. This for us as well. The internet is the fantastic tool for the small and mid-sized company, which allows them to really use that extra space and reach out to a huge audience for that. So this is the sort of environment that GDPR will be playing out on. Now, also on one slide, I wanted to sort of group together all of what we do in terms of website localization. We do this for the world, and it seems very obvious to you. For example, if you're a U.S. company, it seems obvious to you that if you're going to have a Chinese website, it's going to be very different from your U.S. website. It's going to be in Chinese, first of all. Next, it's probably going to be based on Baidu, the search engine that's predominant in China, rather than Google in the U.S. So there's other things as well that's going to make it more Chinese. But the same thing is happening in Europe. Just because you have a US website doesn't mean it's visible in Europe. There are other aspects to a European website that you have to take into account. Translating it into the language, whether that's French, Swedish, whatever, is just one aspect of designing and hosting and managing a website in Europe. One of the key aspects is online security and compliance. Europe has by far the top level compliance and security in the world regulations for online websites and social media. So, it has been a trendsetter in that sense. It continues with GDPR. So if you have European websites, it's important to be having all of these things, these 10 attributes that I've put down. And today we're going to be talking about the online security and compliance part of it for GDPR. So GDPR, in fact, has actually got quite a long history. The web was founded about 30 years ago now, and it was founded on these principles of data sharing, but also on the premise of transparency and accountability. But at the time, I think it was done also very much by sort of idealists, and it was an unregulated place. Regulations have come in over time, and in particular, the sort of big milestones that happened in 1995 in Europe and so on. So the other, major legislation has come in. But GDPR, in a sense, gets back to some of the basics, which is the underlying premise that an individual owns his or her own data. So let's say you sign up for an app. You tick a box that nobody ever reads those things, those terms and conditions. You just tick the box, and then you can use the data. Now, that's okay for most people, but in a sense, the pendulum has swung quite far in the direction of the corporations and the governments at the moment. There's a feeling of abuse and mistrust. So there's a great internet saying, if a product is free to download, if it's free, you are the product. So, the question ultimately, who owns your data, your online persona? Today, that online persona is seen as an asset. It can be bought and sold. It has a growing valuation. It's bought and sold by marketeers, advertisers, but also political organizations, governments, companies, all kinds of people. Shouldn't you have some kind of say in it? That's where GDPR comes in. In a way, GDPR marks the end of the 30 years of Wild West websites that we've had. I'm going to turn over now to Lisbeth.
Hang on, Susanna. I have a quick poll. It's poll number 2. Do you mind if I just jump in there and launch that?
Great idea.
Okay, just quickly, please, everybody, here we go, the second of our 3 polls, launching this one, and it's relevant. Do you have localized websites for your export markets? There we go. Yes, it's everywhere. Yes, in a few. Are you thinking about it? How are you doing? Or no, not at all. So here we go. Let me give you the feedback again. The 2 top, which is yes in all or yes in a few, between them have a collective 45%. 25% are saying they're thinking about it, and the rest say no. Well, that's interesting. Look, there you go. Thank you very much indeed. I'm closing this poll. Here we go. That should indicate the end of the second poll. Susanna, back to you and back to Lisbeth.
Thank you, John. And Lisbeth, if you want to take over from here, or Matthias?
Yes, I am taking over. Good day to everyone. And we are, of course, very pleased to be part of this webinar. To be clear, as our timeline is rather limited for practical reasons, we would just like to give you a first impression on GDPR. And the first question would be, of course, what is privacy? And why is this so important to European citizens? Well, in short, the importance of privacy to Europeans equals to the importance of the First Amendment to American citizens. According to the European citizens, the privacy is something that can never be touched, can never be used for other purposes than those for which authorization has been given. And this basic principle we'll find back in the EU objectives, because there are two things we should take into account. First of all, any European citizen, and it is called a data subject in the GDPR, should have control over what is happening with its data, but not only control, it should also be able to exercise certain rights over the data that is being processed by a third party. The purpose of the present regulation is in fact making those rights global, since anyone, either if you are a European or even a non-European processor, who is processing personal data of a European citizen has to comply. And as you might have heard, if you do not comply, the sanctions can of course be very severe. Fines go up to 20 million euros or up to 4% of a company's global revenues, whichever one is higher. So the question is, does GDPR apply to you? GDPR applies to the processing of personal data of EU data subjects by any company inside or outside of the EU offering goods or services to EU citizens. And this will, of course, have big implications on how you conduct your business. Just to give you a small example, for example, you are a supplier of coffee machines. You are getting a purchase order from an Italian company for 100 coffee machines to be delivered at 50 companies and the addresses of 50 end user natural persons. You are receiving this purchase order from a very nice Italian lady actually working at this Italian company. She will be handling the order, and this Italian lady gives you the contact details of an Italian gentleman in charge of the deliveries. When are you facing personal data? When processing those delivery addresses, when handling the emails with this Italian lady and this Italian gentleman, and so on and so on. Whatever information you receive, whatever you can and cannot do with it without endangering your liability on the privacy field, that is something you have to think about whenever you are communicating and receiving data. So, what is processing of personal data? In short, almost everything. Any operation performed on personal data, including automated collection, storage, consultation, use, transfer, erasure, and so on and so on. So the first advice we give to all our clients is, even before doing an assessment, get rid of any information that has been kept on your servers for over several years and that you do not use any longer. So that is the first thing you will have to do. Clean up any information you are storing within your company. Because, of course, personal data is almost everything again. And that is going from names, addresses, but even localization, financial information. In short, anything that can lead to the identification of a person or is linked to a person. On the good side, what is not considered personal data, for example, email addresses such as info @ welcome @ sales @, but do keep in mind when this email address is being used by a European data subject, giving its signature in the email, it will be considered personal data again. Company information is not considered personal data, and then we have the problem with regards to anonymous data. For now, we have been considering anonymous data as also encrypted data. That is no longer the case under GDPR because merely encrypting data actually does not fall within the scope of anonymous data. As long as you're encrypting, and the means we have to do that will never lead to a situation where you cannot trace it back to the data subject. So be careful to use the term anonymous data. Next slide, please, Susanna. So in the beginning of this presentation, we were talking about control and rights of the EU citizens whose personal data is being processed. And it is not sufficient to store personal data in a safe environment, but you should always be aware that in your capacity of processor or controller, you should also have easy access to the processed data in order to be able to make certain changes to this personal data upon a simple request of the EU citizen data subject. This is in line with the basic principle of availability as used in all information security frameworks, also known as CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability. Not only are data subjects entitled to have a constant overview of what data is being processed, but they also have the right to request to rectify incorrect data, to erase their data, which is the right to be forgotten, and to have data transferred, which is the portability. This again will define the way in which you are storing and processing information in your company.
Hi, welcome in Brussels. This is Matthias. So the next slides and the next section of the presentation deals with the actors of in the GDPR. Who is who? And this is very important in order to define your obligations and your liability. So this first important question is, are you a controller or are you a processor of personal data? Well, this means that in each different role you play, you will have a certain obligation and a certain liability. So the controller is defined as an entity that determines the purpose and the means of processing. This means, for example, collecting personal data for direct marketing purposes. The processor is defined as a third party that processes personal data on behalf of the controller. For example, the distributors, the agents, the cloud service providers, payroll officers, and so on and so on. So your role as a controller or a processor will be determined for each of your processing activities. And that's a big deal for every company because you have to think every step, overthink every step you make in processing data. Let's return to Lisbeth's fine example of the coffee machine seller. So if this coffee machine seller uses end-user personal data yourself in order to sell and ship the machines or the supplies to the end user, you are the controller. If you act as a transporter of the goods to the end user on the instruction of a European wholesaler, you're the processor. In case you're the processor of a European controller, so make it a little bit complicated, well, then you need a data processing agreement that has to be signed. And the regulation on that point is really, really strict. And again, I refer to the big fines that can be that you can have to pay. So if you're a controller, what are your key duties? Well, first of all, informing data subjects on the processing activities, the privacy statement, honoring their rights, and notifying on data breaches. The controller is the one who takes the lead. This means that when gathering the personal data, he has to make the subject aware of the fact that his data is collected, and he has to explicitly ask the consent of the data subject, unless the data is required for the execution of the agreement. For example, you are the coffee machine seller and you have to ship the coffee machine to the consumer. Well, of course, you cannot execute your agreement without having the address of the end client. In case you ask for the consent, the well-known opt-out system, as we all know it just till now, so the boxing, unboxing, and agreeing on the fact that your data is collected, well, it is insufficient. Not only will the data subject have to give his explicit consent that its personal data is being used, it is important that you inform the data subject in detail which personal data is being collected. For example, it is not sufficient to inform the subject with a disclaimer that certain information will be processed. Next step is to inform your data subject of the rights Lisbeth already mentioned. So the portability, the right to be forgotten, the right to consult your data, to view your data, and to change your data. And you have to follow up on any request of your data subject. And finally, part of your role as controller is to keep all personal data secure. In case of a data breach, you will possibly have to notify the competent European data protection authority. And this is a different authority for each European country. So this could have very big implications. Assume I leave my cell phone on the plane and I know every single consumer and every single contact of my company is on this cell phone. Well, in fact, you have to notify the local, every local European authority of the fact that there might be a breach of the information and the data. So the following fact is the key duties of the processor. What is a processor? What does a processor do? Well, he has to guarantee the GDPR compliance towards a controller. This is rather normal and logical, staying within the boundaries of the controller's instructions and assisting the controller in the controller's obligations under GDPR. A controller can only work with the GDPR compliant processor and should ask for proof of their compliance. The relationship between the controller and the processor has to take the form of a written agreement, again, including all clauses mentioned in the GDPR. Obligation to assist the controller, obligation to only work on the written instruction of the controller, guarantees in case of transfer of data outside of the EU. In short, the processor must follow all instructions of the controller. Then the following question is, well, is it possible to transfer data under GDPR out of the EU? No. In short, no, unless that it is made if you are as a foreign company, non-European company, US company, Asian company, you have to take it up on yourself to comply with the GDPR regulation, which means you have to make a formal commitment through EU adequacy decision, binding corporate rules, and you have to actually follow the GDPR regulation. You all know the Privacy Shield. Well, the Privacy Shield was some kind of free ticket to go on the European market. At this point, we are not certain that a Privacy Shield will still remain in existence, which means that and even if you are covered with a Privacy Shield, even then, you might still have to make your proper contracts and you have to comply with GDPR. The Privacy Shield does not exonerate you from the obligation to actually comply to the GDPR. So today, and this was actually the purpose, is to give you all a little bit of homework and to think about next slide, please. Every company should ask the following questions. First of all, you have to think about role qualification. Who is who? Who's who in your firm? What are you gathering? What are you doing with the information, and how will it be processed? So you have to register processing activities. At this point, our local authority in Belgium has already send out certain forms that has to be filled in for every company registering processing activities, but it will exist for every country. You have to update your privacy notices and manage your data subject rights. The information has to be correct of your data subjects. You have to update agreements with third parties and processors. This is what I explained earlier. And you have to have a certain data breach procedure. And then finally, at some point, some of you might have to appoint or might have to be obliged to appoint a DPO, a data protection officer. That's someone who is in charge in following up and the compliancy of your firm. So let's get back to Susan for some case studies.
If I can, Matthias, I'm going to jump in there. Thank you so much. These first steps are very, very useful as a listener coming up to speed on this subject. But we have a poll, so please, before we hand back to Susanna, please, everybody, I'm going to launch the third and final poll. Here it is, and again, of course, it's directly relevant. Has your company begun the process? How are you feeling about GDPR compliance? Will you be compliant by May the 25th? Have you started? Are you beginning the process? Are you planning? Now, let me give you some feedback as how we're doing here. The vast majority are saying planning to start soon, followed by just beginning the process, and there's quite a number, good 20% are saying not sure. Well, here you go. I hope that today the information that we're providing you, that Matthias and Lisbeth are sharing, and the coffee example from Italy is a wonderful example. I hope that we can help you on your road as your company begins the GDPR compliance journey. Susanna, I'm closing this third and final poll, so here we go. Thank you again. Here, I shut this one down and I hand over.
Thank you very much. Thanks also, Lisbeth and Matthias. We wanted to sort of round off with a few case studies, give you some practical views on what we've been doing in terms of the steps, best practices that we've trying to put in place on GDPR. And here's a first for us. We're actually going to use a case study of ourselves. This is actually, we've never done this before, but I think it was, we decided it was really necessary as well, and it'd be a good example, in part really because we're involved in the digital world, we manage websites for other people, we consider GDPR to be core to our business. So understanding and implementing GDPR for ourselves and our clients is part of our core business, so we really should know about this, and therefore let's show what we have done so far, what we're looking at continuing to do, and trying to carve out the best practices that we have seen so far. And I guess the very first thing, as Lisbeth and Matthias were also saying, one of the very first things we did really was to try and figure out amongst ourselves, are we a controller or a processor? And I think like many companies, we're a bit of both. Now, we provide services to companies. In that sense, we're a processor for those companies. We also actively do things on our own. In that sense, we're a controller of our own. So as a controller, we do our own marketing. We have European staff in France, Germany, the UK. We have employees. Their data needs to be processed, kept secure, and all the other rights. What about the service providers we have? We outsource some of the stuff on videos or apps or things like this. All those people that we outsource to and that we get service providers are accountants even. These are all processors. We are the controller of that data. We are of our own marketing. We are the controller of that marketing. But so on that side, the left-hand side in that sense, it's a controller role. On the right-hand side of your slide is what we do. And in those functions, we're a processor. We are told by our clients what to do and then go out and do them. Our client says, I need a German website, so we build a German website. So the end client has the absolute directive of saying, do this or not do this. And therefore, they are the controller, whether they sit in the US or in India. They are the controller of European data. We have their data, their European data, going through our systems. We process that data. We do social media for them, whatever, and we collect that data for them. But they actually, the client actually says what happens with that data. And therefore, they are the controller. We are the processor. So there you go. That's sort of a concrete example of how, what is a controller, what is a processor, and in what sense, you have to decide that on yourself, where you are in that spectrum for that. But from our side, particularly given that we have European employees and European offices, we are clearly a controller in that sense, but we are clearly also a processor of the task for our clients. So what did we do? Well, after deciding what we were, controller and processor, one of the very first things we did was to actually appoint someone within IBT to deal with this. And the sort of knee-jerk reaction is, my God, this looks complicated. Give it to someone absolutely junior who's just arrived. That does not work. This is a complicated issue where you have to have a broad view of the entire business from A to Z. You also have to be able to walk into the CEO or the MD's office, the board level office, and say, we need to do something here. So you've got to have authority, you've got to have seniority, and you've got to have a sort of bird's eye view from A to Z of what the company does. So it is someone who is very high up in terms of the company. But we would recommend appoint someone to take charge and ownership of this whole process. It doesn't have to be someone techie. It can be someone in sales, for example, but they have to have an overreaching view of the entire process of the company. And after that, decide at a senior management level, are you a controller or a processor or a bit of both? The third thing we did was to say our staff need to be educated. And we're in this field, we're in this business, and we're not even sure about it. So we really need to educate people. All of our staff need to know what's going on, from the person doing data entry to the person doing sales, the person doing web design, social media. Everybody in our organization needs to know that this exists, that this is important, and that there are processes that will be put in place that have to be followed. And after that, it was appointing a data protection officer, which is what Matthias mentioned earlier. This has a very specific role in GDPR. It has to be, someone that can actually be reached, and that has it has obligations. It has obligations to phone and to contact the data protection agency in that country if there's a data breach. The fifth thing, which is probably the hardest in many ways, is to map the data flows. Where does information come in? Where does it go out of a company? Who stores it? And then sixth, review all policies. Review the policies on collection of data, the management of it, the security of it, and what to do in a data breach. I'm going to go through this in a slightly enlarged form with another case study after this. But basically, through our own case study, we managed also to put up a series of processes and some steps to go through. And I've actually designed sort of 6 major things that should be happening with data. Should be processed lawfully, fairly, collected for specified explicit, kept up to date, limited to what's necessary, identification of people, and process. So there's quite a lot of steps that have to be built in and policies that have to be built in for the company in order for that to happen. There's a 7th one as well, which I think is I should have put up here, and I put up the other ones. I really should have. Is that this is ongoing. This continues over time and gets reevaluated and relooked at on a regular basis. So the next case study is I slightly cheated a little bit because I amalgamated a few different companies to try and give you the broadest possible picture of what it's like becoming GDPR compliant for an exporter. Now, so this actually is 3 different companies we put together in this one case study. So these are, the case study that I'm giving you here. I'll call it ABC Company. ABC Company is a US company. They export to Europe. They're B2B, they're mid-size, and they sell via an in-market partner like a distributor. So that reflects quite a bit of the people who registered also for this webinar. So we tried to also, try and identify with you. And what did they do? The three companies that we amalgamated for this case study, they have European websites in local languages that we manage for them. And we do their social media and so on. They all attend trade shows. They all have distributors or logistic partners or after-sales service providers or even just end clients in Europe. So they are all concerned with European data in that sense. So that's the background of who they are. Now, we put together for them a 9-step process for their compliance. Steps 1 to 4 are very similar to what I laid out for the IBT ones. Basically, we started off with saying, okay, who's going to be the main interface person talking about GDPR? Who's going to be in charge? And it's, in almost all cases, it was head of international sales, because they had enough seniority. They knew enough about the business from A to Z. They were concerned with it very directly. And they had the authority to walk in and say to the CEO or to the head of compliance or the head of HR or whatever it is to say, we need a boardroom, board level meeting to do this. Then we also helped them to try and give them education to the employees. We helped them with webinars or ebooks, and even just sort of lunchtime chats. What is GDPR? Make sure everyone knows, whether it's the secretary or the board member, they all need to know that this exists. And in each case, the appointment of a data protection officer. This was in each case it was fairly clear who that should be. And helping those companies, helping that US exporter to determine their role. Are they a controller or a processor? And in each case, they are a controller of European data. They have in-market partners, but they are the ones who actually pull the strings. They are the ones in charge. It is their business. It is their product. They're the ones who want to sell in Europe. They are the controller. So those are the sort of that set the background. Those step 1 to 4 set the background, prepared the ground. Basically, it was take it seriously. Step 5 actually is, as I said, it's a tricky one, and it actually probably takes the most time. It's the one that also has to be reviewed continuously. It's about data mapping. Where and how does data flow both within and outside of the company? Where does data flow collected online on the website within the company? And then where does it go after that? It can go in most amazing places, whether it's to your accounts, to your logistics suppliers, your cloud service providers, to us, your online service providers. All of these things have to be thought about, and in which case, are they all secure? Are all of your processors cognizant of GDPR? Are they all working towards being compliant? Internally, do you have secure measures of keeping data? Are your databases all up to date? So again, with the company, in this case, this ABC company that I've put together, each case we went through the process and said, where is that database kept? Where is it kept? How is it kept? Does it go from the finance and so on? So that was the data processing. There's another part of data processing as well, which is about storage and lawful basis. And so data processing also is about not just how it's stored, but also security, data breaching, lawful basis. The lawful basis is about, do you have the right to have that data? Is this consent explicit? Is this data something that is relevant to your business, or is it just a hangover from something you did a couple of years ago? As Matthias was said, one of the first things you got to do is a good spring clean. So again, this data mapping gets into a very large, very complex review of your processes of sales into Europe and what to do about it. So that consent needs to be really granular. It means it needs to cover the various ways you process and use personal data, from marketing to sales calls. One thing as well, databases, are they bought in which case they're not going to have explicit consents, or are they organic? So all these are the things that we considered with our clients. All this looks horrendously sort of complex and so on, but I'd say there's the last couple of steps as well. Inform processors, as we talked about, get in touch with your distributors, have written documentation between them that says that there are agreements between them, that they recognize their obligations. You need also to draft procedures, particularly for data breach. Remember, you need to report data breach within 72 hours. That's not always easy. And then obviously, number 8 is an ongoing implementation and review calendar, so that on a regular basis, you're making sure that all of your data is secure, is in line with GDPR, and that your processors, your partners are also working there. And then step 9, I think, is important. If you are GDPR compliant or getting there, I think you should applaud yourself. I think you should shout about it. It is what it will build trust. And this also gets finally down to the, I guess, the silver lining on this cloud. There are some benefits. You can look at this in terms of an opportunity and not just a challenge. And we would say that there are 3 main ways that you could see this as an opportunity. The first is simply efficient. It means that GDPR there's only one set of rules across all of Europe. And it's very likely that other countries will follow. So there's only one set of rules to look at. As someone who looked after European websites, we used to have 28 different sets of rules. Now there's just one. That's actually quite a saving. Okay, it's a heavy one, but it's one. And as I said earlier, I'm very convinced that other countries will be following in this footsteps. There's also efficiency in terms of your processors. It allows you to do that spring cleaning, that look at your in-market partners and your processors, your partners, and say who is actually functioning well and who is not, who is producing the good databases and who is not, and how are they doing it? Are they up to speed or not? And if not, they need to have some pressure on you to say, right, you need to be GDPR compliant. Otherwise, I can't trust you. The other point is focus. Your clients and contacts say exactly what they want to receive from you. They can say, delete me, and you have to do that. There's now a very explicit, granular demand for consent. You can't just say, yeah, I can buy in a database and spam them. This will not do anymore. That means, okay, this means your marketing needs to be a lot more focused than it used to be. It makes total sense from a business perspective. You don't want to send to contacts that don't want to hear from you. So that's, in a sense, that focuses your ability. In the GDPR requires increased transparency around data collection and processing as well. That's the right to be forgotten and lawful basis for processing in legal language. But that also means that your contacts should be able to ask you what they're signed up for, receive accurate and easy to digest answers. That doesn't sound actually so bad. Transparency is what breeds trust. And if you remember that first picture I had about the client-centric world of business today, it's trust that is the most important part of the buying process. So trust through increased transparency for data collection and processing and regulatory compliance. Put it this way, in 2 years' time, if your website does not say GDPR compliant, I'm not sure people want to deal with you. So that's sort of our more the case studies we wanted to bring up. I hope we've been clear on that. Are there any questions? John, do we have time for any questions?
Yeah, Susanna, look, thank you very much indeed. Very interesting walkthrough there, those steps, very practical. I've got a lot of questions. And many of them about those steps and asking for steps. And I've got lots of hands up. So please bear with us. We won't get to everybody. Ladies first. So Belinda is asking, I'd like to pitch this one to Elizabeth. So it's a US company. They've got business in Europe, but no direct subsidiaries. And they're wondering who enforces GDPR and how. I love that question. Elizabeth, can you help us there, please?
Of course, John. Well, first of all, I should tell you that even in the past, there is already a very good cooperation between EU privacy authorities and US privacy authorities. So the EU authorities will be able to fine US companies to start a legal procedure enforcing it, and to ask for help to the US privacy authorities. So not being an EU citizen or an EU company will not able you to escape from GDPR.
Thank you. That's clear. Great. Susanna, I'm going to jump this one for you. Amanda wants to know, how can you tell if a website is GDPR compliant? Yeah, how do you know?
That's a great question, and I can do many hours on that subject. But you know, for example, when we go through a corporate website, we go through like 4 major aspects, which is identifying the data entries, where the website picks up data, privacy policies in it, and security, and then education. So, but if you were just to, you know, look at a website without being a coder or without having any particular website knowledge, I'd say that there were 2 aspects which would allow you to know instantly whether a website is GDPR secure or not, compliant or not. And the first is the HTTP, you know, the IP addresses of the actual website. HTTP is no longer enough. It just doesn't include a security aspect, what's called a secure login. So if you look up in your browser address list and you say HTTP and then your website address, if it just says HTTP, that's not enough. It should really say HTTPS, and the S stands for secure. If you're not secure at that security locket, what it's called, then you don't really have good security and encryption. And that's sort of a top level thing that you can look out for. The next thing that's an obvious giveaway is if the website has any landing pages, any formulas to fill out. You know, a formula to fill out says, "Hi, do you want us to get in touch with you? Give us your email addresses, give us your details." If there is not a greater level of request for, you know, do you want us to keep your data? Here's our data privacy policy, and so on. Then then in that case it is not compliant. So you can tell both at the HTTPS level and at any kind of privacy policy that should be very obvious and very front of page for a website. So the privacy policy is front of page and it's secure. Those are the 2 sort of blindingly obvious ones. The rest really comes down to a lot of processes that we would put in place for a website. John, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Amanda, I hope that gave you a starter. What I'd like to, Matthias, Jim is saying, what happens on the 26th of May if we're not fully prepared for GDPR? There you go. Matthias, what happens?
Well, Jim, probably nothing. But do you want to take the risk is the main question here. If there is an unhappy client, consumer, or someone who wants to, some Europeans might be mean on this subject, and they complain, and then they will ask, well, why? What have you done with my data? And they go to the local authority, and the local authority goes to European authority, and then comes to you. Well, you're facing fines. You're facing serious fines. So there won't be anything at your doorstep tomorrow saying, well, you're not GDPR compliant, but you have to think about it on the fact that on a certain moment, someone of your company will lose his phone or his portable, and so on. And as a matter of fact, it's not too late. It's not too late. If you can prove, I think, if you can prove that you're busy making your company compliant, well, I think in the first months in Europe, they will be rather okay with it. But you have to think about it. it makes you just vulnerable, the fact that you're non-compliant, and that's actually the main thing. So my advice to everyone is seek professional assistance. As we speak, our website is being transformed also, and so the fact that you have to seek professional assistance is that you can prove that you're busy with it. Thank you, John.
Yeah, Matthias, thank you thank you. I mean, that was great. That was very, very useful. I did read an article recently in the Financial Times saying that they are expecting a spate of legal actions immediately after May, because there's a good number of data privacy agencies that are just waiting to launch. So it's going to be very interesting. Watch that space. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. So Julie, I've got your questions. Virginia, Tony, Ted, there's a bunch of questions in front of me. I'm going to do one last quick one. Susanna from Chris, this says, does the data protection officer have to be someone internal to the company? Well, there you go. Last quick question, Susanna.
Quick answer, no. The data protection officer does not have to be internal to the company. It can be, you can choose, I mean, we're data protection officers to some of our clients. You can choose someone externally. You can choose someone who's in tech, someone who's in law, someone who has your interests at heart. They just have to be European and be able to be contactable and have some knowledge. So the quick answer is no, they do not have to be internally to your company at all.
Thank you.
Can, but they
okay.
Thank you.
Susanna, look, thank you there. Look, please, we have all of the questions there listed. We will be getting back to you in the days ahead. We want to thank everyone for joining and participating today. We hope you've enjoyed this webinar. We hope that you have found a lot of useful information and now have a much better, even a good understanding of your GDPR challenges and how to begin the process of ensuring compliance. At IBT Online and VLV, we have that understanding. We understand the challenges that face you, and we do have solutions to ensure your GDPR compliance. So please, now we have prepared for you a brief survey of how GDPR compliant are you. Do stay and complete this. It'll take you 1 minute, not more. This will enable you to find out how GDPR compliant you are and help you get more value from this webinar. Don't forget, you'll get a recording of this on Friday, so watch out for that. So it's up to me now just to say thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Lisbeth. What a great job you've done. Really useful from all of us attendees and listeners. We really appreciate the understanding that you've given us related to the European General Data Protection Regulation and how we can get ready for May the 28th. Let's all go and get compliant now. Let's complete the survey. And this is a round of applause. Lisbeth, Matthias, Susanna, thank you so much. We're going to shut this down so you can complete the survey, and we wish you a great day. Thank you very much for joining us today.